Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Pyatt and welcome to my YouTube channel. My goal is to help as many martial artists as possible in their journey and study of Jiu-Jitsu, whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced martial artist. I do videos every Friday, so if you like and enjoy this video, then please click subscribe to get them straight to your inbox. This week we are going to look at some of the fundamentals of blocking. Now, we have looked in other videos at how blocks can be used as alternative techniques. So for example, last week we looked at how Gedanbarai could also act as an arm lock, and we looked at some of the principles and important details that underpin that technique. But this week we are just going to focus on purely the concept of blocking in its most basic form. So in my dojo, we tend to talk about, with karate style blocks initially, we talk about 3 stages. So we talk about the idea of, first of all, mastering the technique itself, or the movement of the technique. So for example, for outer block, that would be from the hip, the arm coming across, which is just mechanical and just understanding it's a very basic level. But of course, then the second stage is you then must connect your whole body to the technique. So you want to make sure that your hips, your feet, and everything else comes with the technique so that your body works as one unit to improve and maximize the efficiency and strength of your block. And then the third stage is that then taking it beyond that, you then need to utilize the block to master your opponent. You want to make sure that the position and the angle and everything that you do with the technique puts you into a place where you can more effectively counter and continue your attack. Now this can come in the form of disbalancing your opponent, or it can also come in the form of creating an opening that enables you to continue. So that's our third stage. And then of course, we can then expand that beyond. So one of my criticisms sometimes within particularly shurikei-based karate is that the blocks tend to remain quite large for a long period of time. And Nahate or Goju style karate typically then uses more circular blocks, and the blocks become shorter and closer. In Jiu-Jitsu, this happens very early on. So rather than dealing with hard blocks, you tend to quite early on deal with circular blocks or shorter and closer blocks. And the point is that as you develop, your blocks should become shorter, they should become closer. And so we'll look at why this is important as well. So, if we just use outer block or sopo uke as the basic example. So first of all, if I stay static, and obviously we wouldn't stay static for very long, as the punch comes, outer block is just from the hip, locking across, covering. Of course, this doesn't really give me a massive advantage on my opponent and requires me being stronger than him, particularly if I stay feet still. But this is just the basic level of the technique. Can I do the technique correctly? So obviously, for example, if I was to do something stupid like cut it short, I wouldn't be covering the entirety of my body. So we move on from that pretty quickly. So then I must connect my hip, my feet, and everything else. So as the punch comes, I want to be a lot more solid so that I've got a better angle now, I've got my opponent, and I'm using my body. So if I stay static and show you the difference, if I just use my arm, it's here, whereas after I drop, connect with my body, right, I open my mic up an awful lot more, I've got more potential off balancing, and because I've redirected this punch so much more, he's a lot more off balance, he's a lot more I can do. Then the third stage is I want to take it just beyond connecting with my body, and then I want to start to affect mic. So this is punch combo. I want to make sure that I start to get that moment of position. Now that doesn't necessarily do in a harder block, it might just mean getting my timing better so that I actually connect at that moment to get this balance. The same thing happens on the inside. So if I do like a pulling block and I get that little stretch is useful so that Mike finds it difficult to counter because he's off balance on that moment when I hit. So that's our basic progression. That is, the punch comes, we first deal with the movement, then with the body, and then I want to get my opponent the timing so that I actually disrupt my opponent. And if I do that, then that gives me all my options to attack that I need because I have the time, because my opponent can't recover. So as one, just looking at that example in particular, if I take a good angle here, Mike's options once he's regained his balance are difficult. So of course he could spin and come with a back elbow or back kick or potentially a back kick, right? But of course that takes quite a long time, it's quite easy to see. His other option is that he could use, say for example, Yakuzuki or Mwashige, but he then has to move the foot and open the guard, and again, that is then really slow. So it gives me lots of really quite simple options to take him out. So that's our first fundamentals of blocking. And whether you do karate or jiu-jitsu or whatever kind of martial art, think about how you first work the movement to make sure that you cover, particularly cover the center line. then connect it with your body and consolidate your balance. So there's no point blocking, for example, if I do a slightly stupid example, but if, for example, the front kick comes in and I do this, but I'm off balance, then that isn't going to be effective. And it isn't that using one leg is necessarily bad. If the front kick comes in, but I'm on balance and he's the one that isn't, then that becomes quite effective because you can see it's balancing. But if I end up with this kind of wobble, then I'm going to be in trouble. So it's really important that I consolidate my balance. And then the final stage, another example of a front kick, would be that I want to get him to the point where he is off balance, as opposed to just doing this. And he's going to get me. So I want to create that opportunity for me to do my technique. And I've got that time to do what I want without having to worry about micro retaliation. So, sometimes we deal with, well, what about the second technique? And actually what we really want to aim to do is not worry about the second technique too much, because if my first technique is successful, the second technique should already be neutralised. Obviously, I'm a realist, so we do have to deal with what happens when that comes in. Now, if, for example, right throws a wild technique like a hook punch, that's pretty easy to block because it's so obvious, and you can just go down the centre. But what's more difficult, and perhaps we don't train as much as we should, is when you get multiple attacks very, very quickly. Because in reality, people don't attack in a sort of slow and staccato way. So for example, if we're going to get like the jab cross, what I don't have time to do is do big blocks. So this is where it now becomes important that as a beginner, you will learn blocks that are always, they are large, they are quite overt. But then with time, everything must contract, so that when you first learn, you'll over-exaggerate the rotation on the hip. So as the punch comes, you'll get the hip because you're exaggerating it. But you won't be able to do that if you're standing like this. So you still want to get the rotation of the hips, but you won't have the time to do a massive jumping or a massive preparation. So as the punch comes, you just want to be able to just sit straight into that and then carry on with whatever you're doing. So as the technique comes, rather than doing a big block, so we have the jab cross, I want to make it a lot shorter. So if we do it slowly, as the punch comes, I'm just covering the centre line and then just covering for that second technique. And then I can do whatever I want, whatever finish. So really slowly. So as the punch comes, come over here. So I've got a little bit of kuzushi just as he's moving, but I'm only just covering the centre line. Then as the second punch comes, I bring that up and then I can turn, and then it's up to me what technique I want to do. So sometimes you have to, another example would be as the two punches come, doing very short blocks, just covering the centre line, as opposed to doing a large block that will ultimately leave me vulnerable. But I should start there, so as the punch comes, I should first learn to get that disbalance with that singular block. Then when the second block comes, then I can be solid and then take it through and do whatever technique it is that I want, okay? So this idea of first mastering the movement, then your body, then your opponent, and then considering the contraction of blocks, to me is really important, because as we did last week, for example, with the front kick snap punch, what I want to do when I block the kick is I don't want to make the movement too large, I just want to cover the centre line. So if we have front kick snap punch, 1, 2, I'm just covering the centre line because that gives me my options. I don't need to do excessive movement. So I must make sure that my distance and my timing are exact and are precise. And that is the ultimate challenge of doing blocking techniques. They are simple when you first learn them, but to get the timing to maximise their effect is really difficult. One final point I just want to talk about is what happens when we use a block and then lead it into, what I'd say, for example, a throwing technique. And in Aikijujutsu in particular, this is really important, because in Jiu-Jitsu, obviously, the aspect of Jiu is to comply with or to be gentle. And that aspect, as opposed to being hard, we need to make sure that we keep our opponent's momentum coming. We don't want them to stop. So if I was doing, say, for example, ogoshi hip throw, I wouldn't want to do a block that would be like this, because I've stopped all of his movement. So for me to now do the throw, when I enter, he's static, and then I've got to do all the hard work. So that's not particularly very good. What is better is, as the punch comes, is that I need to keep him off balance. Just that little wobble is enough. So with my block, I want to draw him, right? Just that tiny movement. So when I then go to do the throw, it's smooth, and I keep him moving. So just emphasising the block, that is the moment that I want. So as I get that throw, just keep him moving and then do the throw. As opposed to stop, and then I've got to get in, and then I've got to do the rest. You need that dynamic aspect. So any block that stops him is going to be less effective. So another way would be to use the double hand. It's still that idea. Just bringing him forward. The punch comes. Cross block can do the same thing, but just be careful not to overturn. So for example, you come the strike straight away, and then do the strike. So just with the block, again, think about making it short. Don't feel the need to block out here, because whilst I'm doing that, the second technique, whatever it is going to come in. So consolidate the body, consolidate your opponent and your time with your opponent, then reduce and contract. And make sure that you have the appropriate amount of dew, or if it's necessary, that you become hard and strong when it's appropriate. So I hope you enjoyed that video. That's just some of the basics that we talk about in our dojo, whether we're doing karate or jiu-jitsu in the dojo, some of the basics of blocks. If you want to look at how blocks can be used as alternative techniques, what we did last week with Gerambarai, you can click the video here, or to check out one of our videos, you can click the link here. If you want to subscribe, don't forget to click the link at the bottom, guys, and I will see you next week.